For centuries, China's Terracotta Warriors have stirred the soul and ignited the imagination. Here at the Houston Museum of Natural Science, we are thrilled, privileged, and honored to host these marvels within our own walls for all to witness. I am your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger, and this is the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. Recently, I had the privilege of discussing all things Terracotta Warriors and a bit more with our own spellbinding curator of anthropology, Dr. Dirk van Terenhout. Dr. Dirk van Terenhout, thank you so much for joining us here on the Beyond Bones podcast.
All right.
So we're not actually going to be talking about a lot of bones or dinosaurs or things like that on this episode, but what we have coming to the museum very soon are the Terracotta Warriors, the world famous Terracotta Warriors. Let's start, I think, at the beginning. What's the story of the Terracotta Warriors? Where did they come to be? Who made them? Kind of that aspect.
Let's start with the actual Terracotta Warriors being made,
Sure.
and then we can move on to the actual Terracotta Warriors being found.
Right.
A few years later, just a few.
Yeah, just a couple.
So this is during the very short reign of the first emperor and the only emperor of the Qin dynasty. He is the one who ruled between the early decade of the 3rd century BC, so 206 to 201. The warriors were made on behalf of the first emperor, who was also the only emperor of the Qin dynasty. And he, as a leader of his army, established military dominance over a very fractured landscape, which was typical of Chinese history, where you have ups and downs, unified realms with large territory, and then people start fighting each other and everything breaks up until somebody gets the upper hand again. And so this particular dynasty got the upper hand and unified a huge chunk of the territory one more time under their dynasty. And so he ended up they ended up preparing for him a mausoleum where he would rest in eternity, and he would also be protected in eternity. And that's where we get to the warriors. We don't know what's inside the actual mausoleum. It is currently a very large hill, forested, identified as the mausoleum. Everybody probably knows, and especially people who are interested in Chinese history, you know there is all kinds of mercury inside because he wanted to recreate the rivers and the lakes in his realm. And people tested, scientists in China have tested the soil close by because people are still farming in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But yes, indeed, there is a very high level of mercury.
Wow.
But the warriors themselves do not come out of the mausoleum. They were buried in their own pits, very large pits, and they were facing east because that was the direction they anticipated the enemy to come from. They were protected by mountains behind them. So in all the other cardinal directions, they were okay. But the warriors were prepared.
Right.
And so you had your chariots, you had your crossbow guys, the guys with the halberds, the very long pikes to get people off their horses. Mm-hmm. Very medieval in a sense, but much earlier. And then, of course, also the generals, very few of those, but we'll have one of those individuals, Terracotta Warrior individuals here. So they were ordered to be made. 8 to 9,000 have been identified in a sense. 2,000 may have been worked on or excavated already. There's a lot more, and no doubt they will find even more. So these armies were huge.
Wow.
We have horses as well. There are chariots, as I mentioned. So they were ready to defend the emperor till the last drop of blood, you know. Now, in the exhibit, you will see how they made them. And that's a funny way of saying it, how in the world they don't make them anymore. No, but there are that sort of small models that show two scenes. One is how they made with molds the statues of the warriors, so human beings, and then another model showing how they made the horses. Mm-hmm. Everything was done with molds, and you see from the very beginning where they're preparing the clay to them putting the clay in the mold, and eventually here is a foot or an arm of a soldier, and eventually it all comes together, and then in the end they put the head on top, and then it's finished. Right. The same for the horse, except 4 legs, etc. What is interesting also to mention is that, and as people go through, they should look at that. We have individual facial features. We have different kind of hair do, if you want, different headdresses. So they may reflect different ethnicities, perhaps also different ranks in the army. All of that, they're not individual, same mold for 9,000 individuals, just plop it in and make. So there was a lot of work that was done.
Wow.
Now, they were found a few years later in 1974. And when it comes to archaeological discoveries, there seems to be two different stories that one tells. Either it's a little boy chasing his dog in the field, and the dog is chasing a rabbit, and the rabbit goes into a cave, and the dog follows, and then the little boy follows as well, and then all of a sudden they find something wonderful. Or scenario number two, which is in this case the case for the warriors, there's a farmer who's digging a well. And so he's digging, and all of a sudden he pulls out a limb, maybe a leg or an arm. And apparently he was very much beside himself, 1974. So I was told that he decided that he needed to hang this arm or leg from a nearby tree just to make sure that the spirits, wouldn't follow him or something. Mm-hmm. At least they made the right decision, go talk to somebody in the community, and eventually it made it up the food chain all the way to Beijing, and they sent a team out to investigate, and then the warriors were found. No longer to be hung from a tree, but going in a museum, right, which is where we prefer them to be.
Yeah.
And so over the years, people have been excavating more and more. And this is also part of our exhibit, which is interesting in its own right. So we've had Terracotta Warriors visit our museum before, but over the last 25 years, say the first quarter of the 21st century, technology has progressed, and also our archaeological knowledge of the area has increased. Mm-hmm. So for those people who have visited the previous exhibit, they may remember that there was talk about, these warriors were painted. A lot of them nowadays, they appear, they're all drab, the same kind of brownish color.
Right.
But imagine an entire army looking back at you in just vivid Technicolor,
Right.
And so they were. We don't have an actual terracotta warrior painted here, but there are text panels that show you the details because it's still extremely fragile. Right. But they figured out a way to preserve the paint. As before, it wasn't possible, apparently, not that easy. So now they have been able to do that. And so we have photographs to show bits and pieces like a belt or a shoe where the colors are extremely vivid still. So
yeah,
it helps you with the imagination too.
I must admit that I never thought of Terracotta Warriors being fully painted like that, because what we usually see is right, them in brown or grayish, however, looking as the terracotta that they are.
Right.
But it makes complete sense that for their intended use, it would look much more realistic to an incoming army to have something more than just statues, to have actual warriors that looked like and had the colors of.
Right. And like you said, we are used to, because of previous exhibits or maybe books or TV series, where we've seen them like they always have been, and now we know better. Mm-hmm. And the same goes for Roman statues. There are the famous white marble statues of the emperor who's standing as the emperor, and then you realize they too were painted.
Wow.
And you go, wait, that's just not right. Well, no, it was.
Yeah.
So we learn all the time.
And that's the whole point of science, and science compounds on itself. I saw a Facebook post you put recently about you learn more as you go. And it's not, this is nothing you mentioned, but I've heard some, let's just call them naysayers, not just specifically with terracotta, but with dinosaurs or any aspect of science. Oh, scientists keep moving the goalposts. I don't think that's an accurate representation of what's happening. No. For me, what's actually happening is the camera comes into tighter focus, that as you learn more, sure, you can see
that's
more,
right,
realize more, see more detail, and it's not moving the goalposts. It's getting a better focus, a better idea.
And we get to know more, and so we can clarify and correct misinterpretations, or also say, and now we know a little bit more than we used to know 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So now our understanding is a little bit more elevated. That's not the end. 10 years from now, they'll find additional information, no doubt.
Right. Can you speak to, and I don't know perhaps where this idea came from in my mind, but that some of the terracotta warriors have the actual warriors encased within
the clay,
Oh,
the
interesting.
skeletons.
I've never heard that.
Okay.
As far as I know, no.
Okay. Well, that answers that. I've seen it. I've seen the question asked elsewhere, and just
If they have warriors inside.
exactly if someone if there was part of some of them could have been a part of a burial or was part of some
Oh
ritual
yeah. So it's a
to
mix.
immortalize them, basically.
I can see we had our Pompeii exhibit here, and of course the human remains, the skeletal material was preserved in the ash, but then the soft tissue disappeared, and then people poured a plaster through a hole from the top to the bottom, and then it filled up, but with the bones still inside. And so people might have thought the same about maybe
Perhaps.
Terracotta Warriors.
And that could be perhaps part of that rumor. But Terracotta Warriors, obviously, like you mentioned, they were, and I didn't realize this, they were crafted piece by piece and then put together. It wasn't one mold of a human and you pour the clay into it or whatever you had and it formed that mold. Like, I don't believe they may have had plaster maybe they did, maybe they didn't. That's not how the Terracotta Warriors
No,
were
this
formed,
is all,
so.
terracotta means basically terra is clay and cotta is cooked or it's prepared in a fire. So,
and I think I'll mention this because I know that people are thinking this, because if I'm thinking it, then maybe somebody else is thinking it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
When you think of terracotta, we think of those orange pots.
Yeah.
At the hardware store.
Yeah.
And
Flower pots. Things.
There must be perhaps some similarity, maybe different materials used, different substances.
These days, for sure. Well, nowadays, when you go to any garden store, you will see the flower pots, and they're all made with a machine.
Right.
But in these early days, they were done on a industrial basis, if you want. So they had plenty of people in line, and you and I were going to make the feet, and the next guy is going to make the lower leg, and then the next guy is going to make the torso, and then the next bunch of people will make maybe the arms in different positions, and then the final product would be very carefully the head coming out of the mold. And so you put it all together one at a time, and eventually it's standing upright but without a head, and then you put the head in.
And that would make sense from a just a manufacturing process, like you said, pre-industrial revolution, thousands of years before industrial revolution. But just the idea of humans have always been smart. We may have not had all the tools and technology that we have now, but humans weren't any less, in my opinion at least, any less intelligent than they are now. We just have more tools now. So the idea of let's mass produce these feet, let's mass produce these arms, let's mass produce these legs. It makes sense that you'd mass produce many of the body parts that might as well be interchangeable between warriors and people.
Sure.
But then you have one master craftsman basically working on the facial features of the emperor, or of the general, or of the highly esteemed warrior.
And considering this is China, and nowadays, and in the past as well, they have a few people in China. And so they would not have had one production line. Who knows? Hundreds of them. Is
there an estimate of how many Terracotta Warriors could have possibly been produced? Is there any sort of rough?
Not that I know of. I've seen numbers like 8,000 to 9,000 warriors, statues of all kinds. I've also heard 2,000, as in maybe better studied or completely excavated. Some of them have been found broken beyond repair. Most of them are broken. And so there's an entire team nowadays, teams, plural, working on putting the puzzles back, Humpty Dumpty back together again. So that's your job,
Yeah.
Very carefully and in the right way, with glue that can be undone in case you make a mistake and all that. But there too, referencing a point I made earlier, with technology going further along and moving along, so we know, and we knew from the past, but we now know that the Terracotta Warriors were painted. The Chinese scientists have figured out ways to stabilize that paint. And I have seen photographs of the big pit, as they call it. Imagine a huge hangar, airplane hangar. We've all seen the photos, I'm sure. There's a platform or podium where you look down, and there's hundreds and hundreds of warriors looking back at you.
Rows and rows.
In that same space, on top of some parts of the line of the warriors, are these what look like small cabins. They have windows, air conditioning on top, and so they have been placed in a specific spot for a specific reason. And that's probably because they wanted to completely close off that space, because the Terracotta Warriors inside, below that roof with the air conditioning, needs additional special treatment. That was not something that they were able to do 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
But now they're working on that. And so they have figured out ways to better preserve those warriors. And that takes know-how, that takes input of a lot of people. And in addition to all of that, so science moving forward is one thing. Archaeology expanding its field, its horizon, has also brought us new information. And that is represented in the exhibit here as well. We will have on display artifacts from areas farther north than the heartland, the traditional heartland of ancient China. And it used to be, until it no longer is, established knowledge that the books say, professors say, this is where China arose, end of story. And then you have other archaeologists who go, I don't think that's necessarily true, and let's take a look at this, and that. For example, we have chariots here on display. And most recently, in the last 25 years, people have been excavating farther afield, finding older sites than the Mausoleum site and the famous Terracotta Warrior site, where plenty of, an abundance of horses and also of chariots. So they imported the horses and kept importing the horses from the area where they were most prevalent. That's not technology per se, that's animals. But then the chariots, they were producing the chariots and high quality chariots farther north, and they were reconfiguring them farther south in the heartland of China. So that has literally shifted the focus a little bit farther north as to where everything came together.
Right.
For the nerds, that's interesting.
And there's going to be plenty of nerds listening to this. It's fascinating to me too. A nerd of all trades,
Of
I
course,
guess.
yeah.
Taking information. That's why I love talking to you about subjects like this. I want to go back and mention something about the importance of, they found these sites in China decades ago. They didn't have the technology to best preserve the conditions around them to preserve the artifacts. It reminded me of woolly mammoth and late Ice Age sites, that specimens from thousands of years ago, let's say 10,000 years ago, not necessarily in the case of Terracotta Warriors, but just that time scale, thousands of years, that when you uncover something, especially something like a mammoth bone, it is unbelievably fragile. And as the paleontologists in this case, for the mammoth bones, will uncover the bone, they'll say it will start forming fissures. The second it touches the air, it starts being destroyed. It is a constant race against Mother Nature, trying to reclaim the terracotta, reclaim the wood in the chariots, reclaim even the iron they may have used, which the use of iron, sorry to go on this, it's a useful rabbit trail.
Sure.
But you wonder, pre-industrial, possibly pre even metallurgy and alloys that may have been at the very beginning of that time period of figuring out, oh, we can make alloys, we figured these things out. A lot of brads or joining metals were iron.
Yeah.
And you think, well, why was it just iron? Can you answer? I have an idea in my head, but can you answer where did they find the iron to make these chariots, if they used it at all?
So, well, we go through anywhere in the world. This is a system that came out of Europe when somebody was looking at, I think it was a Danish archaeologist who came up with the Stone Age, Copper Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age. We're all familiar with the names, but they happen at different times in different parts of the world, but they happen nonetheless.
Right.
So in China, you have, and represented in the exhibit, the Stone Age. So we have the New Stone Age, or Neolithic, fancy word of saying the same thing. And then eventually we get into the Bronze Age, and we have lots of beautiful bronze, incredibly intricate designs of vases, teapots, you name it, plates, that were found at a time when that was the metal of choice. They would have mined that in China. Like today, China has a lot of natural resources, and so they would have figured it out how to, but again, it would have been pre-industrial, industrial mining, so this is not like huge machines going down in a mine that is in big trucks driving everything back on top.
Exactly.
But they had the people, and so one basket at a time, bring it up to the surface. And eventually, during the emperor whose mausoleum had the soldiers associated with him, that's the Iron Age already, definitely the Iron Age. And so the weaponry would have been made out of iron. The bolts for the crossbow, same thing. The swords, the daggers, everything was made out of iron, which would have been mined. And they were already far advanced along the centuries and centuries worth of experience figuring things out. And I always joke, but that's probably the way it works sometimes. It's my redneck theory of invention. There are people sometimes who go, well, get a load of this, I'm going to try this.
Right.
Sometimes it was a big boom and no more.
Yeah.
Or sometimes like, what do you know? This thing worked.
Right.
And so in this case, for a lot of the ironsmithing, obviously in the end it was successful. So people learn from mistakes. We all do. And you get a beautifully preserved and very intricately designed and decorated copper and bronze teapots, and then later the weaponry associated with the warriors. The wooden shaft of a spear, for example, is gone, but the halberd, the weapon on top, the pike, if you want, is preserved because it's sturdier material.
Right.
And so that you can see, and then those who know can start to look and X-ray it and all the fancy stuff, the composition of the iron, any idea of what kind of molds they use. Is it some kind of a fissure or some kind of seam that you can tell was where the two parts came together?
Right.
And then you really get into the rabbit hole, but it's fun.
I like to think of a lot of archaeological work and paleontology, but we'll keep it on subject with archaeology and anthropology for that matter. There's a lot of CSI. There's a lot of crime scene investigation, you know, and if you found a warrior in this region of, any region of China where there are terracotta warriors at the same time, and you found a skeleton with the pike of a spear.
Oh, sure.
Kind of back, and you start, it's like a trace fossil in terms of paleontology. That spearhead lodged or laying underneath that skeleton tells the story of how that individual was living and how they did die.
Yeah.
So if they were on a battlefield, if there are many different human remains found, and there's all sorts of
evidence of
chunks out of bone and things like that, or maybe an indent in a skull or something like that, it's kind of gruesome to think about. But it always, in my mind, it helps bridge that gap of time. Now I can imagine what this person was doing.
Yes, and that makes, literally, like you said, the history come alive, or the camera better in focus. And it's not academic where people go, and then you had warriors walking across the field. Well, they were also human beings with lives and fears, and what am I going to make it through the day or not? So that, to that extent that we can tell a story here, we do in this exhibit as well.
That's beautiful. And if you haven't already mentioned it, and maybe you have, I've just been so flabbergasted and starstruck by all this information. What time period are we talking about? When we have these warriors here, do we have a date range for these?
200, so this is roughly about 200 BC, a little bit.
Okay.
About, what, in other words, 2,225 years ago. More or less.
A connected observation / question. Something that boggles my mind, and maybe somebody else listening or watching this.
Right.
We have to remember, we take for granted today that we have 747s and 787 Dreamliners and ships that go across oceans in a matter of weeks and everything. That before all that, that's a fairly recent, the world became smaller fairly recently.
Yes.
So you would have these ancient dynasties and these terracotta warriors, and they're preparing for only the people that they knew were around. All these things were happening here in China, and maybe they weren't so much aware of what they were doing in Egypt.
Oh, that's a fair point. Now, 200 BC would have been roughly about 100 years after Alexander the Great came through, conquered everything, and then his successors. So these are the ancestors to famous queen known as Cleopatra. Roughly at the same time, Roman Empire didn't quite exist yet, but the Rome was starting to grow. And then in the Americas, you have people running around like the Maya. The Aztec were not quite in the picture yet, and Inca neither. But you have civilizations all over the place. But now, in regards to China, and it has an extremely long imperial history. We may all have seen the movie The Last Emperor. Well, that story ends in 1912 AD. Right. That's like 100 years ago and then some.
Yeah.
Okay. So and he lived in the Forbidden City in Beijing. So China at one point along the line between the emperor, the first emperor and the last emperor, in a dynasty called, it was the Ming, I believe, they send out a fleet, a huge fleet, roughly the same time as the first Europeans started sailing looking for the spices in India. Everybody's looking for India, and they found the wrong India, and here we are with people, indigenous people referred to as Indians.
Right.
But the fleet that was sent out by the Chinese at the time had ships with 4 huge masts, and their deck was at the same level as the tip of the single mast of the main ship that Columbus took to the Americas. And I've seen a drawing where it's represented as such. And so here's the flagship of Columbus. And if you climbed all the way into the crow's nest, you would have been barely able to see the surface of the deck. And then you would have had the additional forest of 4 massive sails and masts. But that ship, sort of the aircraft carrier equivalent of the day, was the center of a much larger fleet. With they were sent out to explore by the emperor, go forth and figure it out and come back with all kinds of cool stuff. And they did.
And map things out to best your ability.
Right.
Yeah.
But they were surrounded by military ships to protect. They had scientists. They grew their own food on these ships, by the way, hydroponics. And then they had ships that would go back, very fast-moving, smaller ships that would go from the main fleet when they saw a shoreline. Let's go get water. Let's go get food. Let's go do this. Let's go to the store or go get it.
Corvettes and such.
Come through.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure.
No, you're good.
Fine.
No, you're good.
And so they did make it all the way in much later days, but still China. They made it as far for sure as East Africa. And we know that because the famous China ware is found in places like Tanzania, in that part of Zanzibar, where they use it as mosaics. Broken teacups, blue and white color, is also something you find in Islam. And so that is in decorations. So they reuse the broken pottery, if you want, China ware. And they can identify, they can analyze them. So yes, they were there, they made it. Some people said they made it all the way to the Americas, but we don't have any evidence of that. But they were able to do that. Yeah. So they were aware fairly long ago of what was beyond the horizon and over the next hill. And then it was always the same. The emperor died, his son came into power and said, we're done with all of that. So when the fleet came back, he said, sink the ships and we're done.
We're done. We know what we need to know for now, at least.
I have no idea. We have a different mentality.
The decision making. So that was such a mind-blowing answer to that question, because it's, like I said, it's when humans really became circumnavigating. It was a long time ago, and it's very fascinating.
And for those visitors here to the museum, they may remember we had a beautiful exhibit from Western China many years ago. And it was about the Silk Road. It was mummies of the Silk Road.
Oh, yeah.
And today, modern China is building a network of roads for trucks and railroads, ports for ships, obviously, airports for planes. But they're reimagining this ancient Silk Road because the Roman Empire was aware of China. China was aware of the Roman Empire. But they had all these weird references because it was far over the horizon and they didn't have immediate connection, no FaceTiming in those days. Yeah. So there was just hearsay and description, but they were aware. They were trading. Silk, for example, came all the way through. This is not based on ships sailing around, but on
the Silk Road.
The Silk Road business and the exhibit we had based on that did show people moving back and forth across the landscape. In this case, people who settled in the western part of China in the desert, but therefore also extremely well preserved for us to analyze.
Natural
and study.
mummification and such.
Yes. But it showed that in early days, people we always are, and still today, NASA are going up in space, and the Chinese are sending, I heard this morning, taikonauts instead of astronauts, but okay, here we are.
Yeah.
But still exploring and looking what's over the horizon. So they were doing this for quite a while, and for a large period of time, they were much more advanced than anything else in the world. So ships size-wise and exploration-wise,
Yeah.
hundreds of years ahead.
Yeah. Absolutely brilliant. The last question before we wrap up. You jokingly said we have 2,000 years to go.
Well, yeah.
And we do. And that's what
And we'll do it in the next 30 seconds.
Exactly. We'll wrap it up in 30 seconds. Now, I guess my last question was, I know there are sculptors now, and there are people who make busts of things and even entire statues out of every known material to man.
Sure.
Is there anyone today still making terracotta warriors in the traditional ways?
Well, you brought up earlier, did they make them in one big mold? And the answer to your question would be today, yes.
Today, yes.
And so if you want to put the equivalent of a very large garden gnome in your front yard, there are businesses that will make it for you, terracotta, here in the States and elsewhere, I'm sure. And I'm sure in China too, for the purpose of selling it to you to put it in your front yard. But that would be today, with the help of machines, press the clay into the right shape, and there it is. Not the way they did it, and that's probably also an answer to your question. It might currently be perhaps, I don't know, it's a solid piece as opposed to a hollow piece. I don't know if that would work though. But anyway, when they put it together bit by bit, it was easy to handle weight-wise. And if you have machines today, you can just move that statue around more easily. And I'm not sure if that statement that I made is absolutely correct, that they're completely solid. But we shall now go to a garden place and figure it out, buy one on the museum's account and smash it open for science purposes.
Next podcast, we'll go to Pottery Barn, or not Pottery Barn, what is it? Lowe's, that little section in Lowe's.
The garden
Just
portion.
go to the garden.
Let's see.
But I guess the question, great answer, but I'm wondering if there was somebody who studies the old ways of
see
creation,
how it was done,
and they're recreating that.
I would not be surprised. But I have not seen any evidence of that. I would imagine there are people who are artists, not the scientists. They're scientists in their own right, but they're artists, so they express themselves in a very colorful way. And I'm sure people have made 3D prints of life-size warriors, and you pick your favorite color, and it's going to be a yellow one, and a blue one, and a red one, whatever you want.
Yeah.
But it might also be perhaps more traditional terracotta. So there, back to your question, they would have had to study how they did it.
Right.
And then maybe they would paint them, but maybe with a design that is definitely modern as opposed to a copy of the ancient one. And they express themselves through a medium that is older.
Right.
Today. And so you would immediately see, oh, that's today. I've seen, this is also getting off the track somewhat, but Star Troopers with Northwest Coast designs, so like what you would find in Canada and in southern Alaska.
Yeah.
So it's all white, and then you have these very famous designs of killer whales and ravens etched in or painted on top of the entire armor. Pretty cool. And you can say right away, that's not your traditional Star Warrior.
Right, exactly. And I guess the reason why I asked that question is in a previous podcast, I was talking to Kat Havens, and she was telling us about how, forgive me, I forget exactly where, but a college was trying to reproduce traditional mummification, the best they knew of from ancient Egypt, which there is actually not a whole lot of documentation on it. So how they were trying to, this college was trying to figure out, how do you do it? Because we've all heard the gruesome little details. Oh, they used a pick and they would pull out.
Absolutely true. And every boy in a school group knows that.
Right. And so these students and this professor tried to recreate that, and they found that it was extremely difficult. Yes. And they found ways in trying to well, how did they do this? They found ways of like tilting the body left and right and using tables with straps instead of a solid like marble table or what have you, straps so you can reach around the body and do different things. And they learned so much. They had so little information to go on, but they learned so much by trying to recreate.
And by the way, for those who are interested in coming to our museum, that too, at one point, we had such a mummy in our museum, Mummies of the World show. We had also, as I like to say, a few years ago, people donate their body to science. So they sign a piece of paper when they have no idea. Typically, one expects that you will end up in medical school and the students will study you. They will cut you open and find out how human beings work.
How you tick.
Yes.
You tick.
But in this particular case, the individual himself was a male, and his family never knew that actually he was going to be mummified. It was in Baltimore, I believe. Gentleman, it was mummified in Baltimore. And he traveled, and he was in the show, in our exhibit, where we had mummies from all over the world, not just your Egyptian mummies. We had bodies that were taken out of the moors in the Netherlands and Denmark. Mummies from everywhere.
Yeah.
And even from the Pacific, believe it or not. But here was this person, and he was probably mummified about 20, 25 years before the exhibit started traveling around. And so they also learned the hard way, and they will, and I don't know how, patience is a virtue, how long they will have to wait until they figure out this really worked. In our case, going back to our earlier number, it might take 2,000 years.
Right. And to bring it back to Terracotta Warriors, if there is if maybe someone listening to this podcast, they'll find the podcast and hear us asking, is there anybody making Terracotta Warriors in the traditional way as of 200 years BC? Is there someone trying to attempt that? And if there is, what are you learning about that process to try to connect the dots and again, connect us to peoples who came thousands of years before us?
And to that point, mummies from Egypt, they didn't leave us a book because they knew how already.
Right.
And the same for the artisans and the craftsmen in China. They already knew how it was. They didn't need the Allen wrench and the IKEA schematics to figure out how to make it.
And the
they
missing
did
screws.
It for their entire life.
Right.
Their dad before them. And their grandpa before them. So you ask, and that's the end of that, you know?
Yeah. The vast importance on oral tradition of, like you said, they didn't need to write it down in books because it was just basically in your DNA from upbringing, from your birth. You knew how to do this thing, and then your children would know how to do the thing, and their children know how to do the thing until we get to modern days and you can just 3D print something and download a file.
Or if you don't know, you Google it. But that's a different story altogether. Yeah, but in those days, oral tradition, or they had writing, but they would not have written that down because it was, why would I write it down?
Right, because it was such common knowledge that everyone knows this. Why would we write it down? Hindsight is 20/20. Hindsight is 2000.
Always is.
Dirk, when is this exhibit opening?
Mid-November. So I think, as always, it happens with special guests, honored guests from museums in China that will come. So November 14th, and I think it's open to the public, give or take, the 15th. I think it's the 15th.
I'll have all of that information in the description.
Double check.
Exactly. We'll have it all right.
You can trust me, but you have to verify me.
Yeah, trust but verify.
Exactly. Always.
Dr. Dirk Van Terenhout, thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Thank you. Good conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the HMNS Beyond Bones podcast. I've been your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. If you liked this episode, be sure to like, follow, rate, and share this podcast with friends and family you'd think would enjoy it. You can also drop us a line at podcasts@hmns.org. Make sure to follow HMNS across all social media. But until next time, as always, stay safe and stay curious.